The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club is probably one of the most famous biker gangs around the world. This club of motorcyclists was founded by Otto Fridelli in Fontana, California back in 1948. The outlaw biker gang has become an international corporation over the years. They've also had quite a few run-ins with law enforcement officials who've openly accused the gang members of criminal activity. Most of the members of Hells Angels are white males who ride the infamous Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Each member is known in a club by a legal or official name, which is usually a colorful nickname. Membership status is tightly controlled in this club, and all prospective members have to face a long and excruciating vetting and initiation process. Those who resign from the club are required to turn in all the regalia bearing the corporation's name or the death head insignia. Some Hells Angels chapters have their clubhouses, but most of the members just gather in bars and ride out together on journeys to recreational destinations. Several members of the club have been identified by law enforcement for being involved in various crimes, including illegal substance distribution, racketeering, and violence.
A Hells Angel in 1986 says the club was involved in a missing persons murder.
Despite its might and power, the club can't protect its members from the justice system, so numerous Hells Angels have ended up behind bars in the past. Here are 10 Hells Angels members reacting to a life sentence. Number 1. Adam Lee Hall.
Over there at the house on Sunday afternoon to meet with you.
20 miles away at a barbecue.
Adam Lee Hall is one of the most notorious members of the Hells Angel Club. Hall was among the 3 men who faced charges in the death of 3 people out of Berkshire County in August 2011. The main victim, David Glasser, was supposed to testify against Hall. That's when Glasser and his roommate Edward Frampton, along with their friend Robert Chadwell, disappeared. All 3 men belonged to Pittsfield. Prosecutors revealed during the proceedings that Hall was a ranking member of the local Hells Angels chapter. He, along with David Schowle of North Adams and Caius Vias of Pittsfield, abducted the 3 victims from Frampton's home and took their lives. All 3 were found dismembered in Beckett around 2 weeks after they disappeared. The 3 defendants in the case were tried separately. During the trial, the jury found Adam guilty, and the judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms. Kinter said that the case showed depravity and disregard for human dignity beyond his experience. He also commented on how brutal Hall and his accomplices treated David Glasser and that Frampton and Chadwell were targeted simply because they had the misfortune of being there when Glasser was abducted. Besides the 3 life sentences, Kinter also imposed 2 more consecutive sentences, 12 to 15 years for armed robbery followed by 8 to 10 years for kidnapping. 1 life sentence for a first-degree conviction is mandatory and carries no possibility of parole. The Superior Court jury convicted Hall of all 3 deaths along with 12 other crimes after hearing testimony for 3 weeks and deliberating around 17 hours. Hall targeted Glasser particularly because he was suffering from a mental disability and was vulnerable. The families of the victims said that Hall deserved the strict punishment he received. During the trial and sentencing, he didn't show any signs of remorse. Number 2. Neil Cantrill and his gang. Neil Cantrill was a longtime biker and leader of a 2016 extortion plot. He, along with his 38-year-old son Stephen and fellow Hells Angel Robert Lowry, took the life of an associate. The Alberta gang leader with his companions kidnapped and assaulted the former BC associate who was no longer interested in the growing illegal pot. During the trial, BC Supreme Court Justice Ward Branch accepted that Neil, who was 62 at the time, was the leader of the extortion plot. The judge also claimed that he and his co-accused deserved a longer sentence than they received. All 3 men were convicted in 2020 for kidnapping, extortion, aggravated assault, and overcoming resistance for the vicious attack on Robert Hoole, who was a former Hope man for Cantrill more than 12 years ago. Back in December 2014, Hoole had traveled to Edmonton to tell his partners that he wanted out of the illegal business. He also offered the growing equipment to Cantrill. Until July 2016, Hoole didn't hear from Neil, but eventually he contacted him to arrange a meeting. The very next day, Hoole arrived at a roadside pullout near Hope. This is where he was grabbed and beaten. Afterwards, Hoole was taken to his house where the 3 convicts tried to force him to sign over the property. RCMP officers arrived and Hoole was taken to the hospital for cuts, broken bones, and a burn on his forehead. He was severely impacted by the brutal assault and was forced to enter the Witness Protection Program. According to Judge Branch, Hoole left town fearing that his life was on the line. Branch also said that a report filed at the sentencing hearing showed that Cantrill had no remorse for his actions. Quoting the report, Branch said he stated he felt he was definitely owed some money and was certainly trying to get what was rightfully his. The subject feels bad the guy got hurt, but should have known what was coming. The subject did not express any remorse. Neil had control over his son and Lowry, who served as the muscle for his extortion scheme. Neal was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and at the sentencing hearing, he calmly sat and listened. He did not express any emotion and also seemed to have no regrets over what he did. Number 3. Emery Martin. Emery Martin is a longtime Hells Angel member who goes by the nickname Pit. He's a veteran of Quebec's brutal and deadly biker war. He was sentenced for trafficking narcotics. Martin has spent more than 20 of his 63 years on Earth in prison. He's been a Hells Angel member for more than 25 years. Martin has admitted that he was a member of the Montreal chapter when he started his narcotics dealing ring, but switched to the New Brunswick Nomad chapter in November 2016. In October 2021, he was sentenced for being a senior executive of a significant interprovincial narcotics ring. He was one of several people arrested in 2018 in Project J Thunderstruck, an RCMP-led investigation into high-volume bulk trafficking from Quebec into New Brunswick. The court said that without Martin, there would have been no illegal substances to sell. In her ruling, the judge wrote, his status as a member of the NB Hells Angels Nomad gave him the power to direct trafficking in the territory he controlled. The network, without Mr. Martin's permission, would not have been able to traffic on its territory. After lengthy pre-trial hearings, Martin was scheduled for a 4-month trial, which he was averted and then struck a plea deal. Martin had agreed to plead guilty to 2 of his 5 charges: conspiracy to traffic and committing a crime for the benefit of a criminal organization. He was the facilitator between the supplier of bricks of uncaught narcotics in Quebec and a group of New Brunswick traffickers led by Marcel Friot. He permitted Friot and his colleagues to sell on the territory of northeastern New Brunswick, in return got paid a tax on everything they sold. Martin didn't need to do a lot of work for his money. He gave his blessings and introduced the buyers to the sellers. He also took care of solving various problems related to deliveries. They all communicated using encrypted phones. Between May 2016 and July 2017, the group moved a whopping 96 kilos of illegal substances. Martin was supposed to serve an 8-year sentence, but due to an assault incident in prison, LeBlanc chopped 6 months off Martin's prison sentence. Number 4. David Giles. David Giles was also a long-time Hells Angel. He was sentenced to a whopping 18 years in prison back in 2017. This was actually one of the longest ever sentences handed out to BC members of the notorious biker gang, whose members are often found involved in criminal activities. He was convicted for his leading role in a conspiracy to smuggle half a ton of an illegal substance almost 5 years prior to his trial. At the time, Giles was 66 years old and in ill health. He struggled to breathe in the prisoner's box while the BC Supreme Court Justice read out her reasons for giving him 18 years. Ross said, considering the nature of his transaction and the quantity of the substance involved, the intention for it to be an ongoing venture, Mr. Giles told, and Mr. Giles' personal circumstances, I have concluded that the fit sentence is 18 years. She also gave Giles almost 7 years' worth of credit for his time in pretrial custody, so he had to serve a net jail time of 11 years and 1 month. Giles had been convicted in the previous fall for conspiracy to import an illegal substance and conspiracy to traffic for the purpose of trafficking after he and his associate Kevin Van Callerin brokered a 2012 smuggling deal with police posing as South American suppliers. Van Callerin also pleaded guilty on the day of his trial and received a 16-year-long sentence. It had taken the police months of negotiations to arrest Giles and Van Callerin with a $4 million down payment and 200 kilograms of narcotics that were delivered to a Burnaby warehouse. 6 others were also arrested with them. Giles' lawyer, Paul Gill, had argued for a lower term since his client was critically ill with liver disease and needed a transplant as soon as possible. He said that Van Callerin was the real leader of the conspiracy and that he was the one who had put up all the cash and introduced Giles to the undercover cold. Judge Ross agreed that Giles' health had to be considered, but she rejected the argument that he was subservient to Van Callerin while he was making arrangements for the mass shipment. Ross said once Mr. Giles was recruited to the conspiracy, he acted as Mr. Van Callerin's equal partner and was treated by Mr. Van Callerin as such. At the time, Giles was the vice president of the Hell Angels Kelowna chapter. He told the court that his target was to make 500 kilos every 3 months. He also repeatedly referred to his market, his plan of distribution, and his buyers during the proceedings. The prosecutor, Chris Greenwood, had recommended a term of between 18 to 20 years for the fragile, balding Hells Angel. He argued that it was quite clear from incepted conversations that Giles was a major player in the trade for years. Number 5. Norm Cox and Rob Thomas. Norman Cox and Robert Leonard Thomas were full-patch members of Kelowna Hells Angels. The two men, along with 4 others, took the life of Dane Phillips in a June 2011 incident. Phillips was 51 years old at the time of his death. The unfortunate man was just trying to peacefully resolve a conflict between his 2 sons and 2 other teenagers who were associated with the Hells Angel Biker Club. His son actually witnessed the brutal assault. Thomas and Cox struck Phillips on the head using a baseball bat and a hammer. One of the 4 accused Hells Angels charged in Dane Phillips' death was motivated to take part in the attack because of his gang connections, according to the prosecution. Crown Counsel Joe Bello, in his final submissions, said that the anger of the accused towards Phillips prior to the June 2011 attack was amply demonstrated. Both Cox and Thomas were sentenced to 15 years in jail for taking Phillips' life. Their sentence got reduced to 12 years after receiving credit for pre-sentence custody. While handing down the sentence, BC Supreme Court Associate Chief Justice called it a brutal and determined attack with weapons on an unarmed man who was just trying to resolve a dispute. Phillips's wife, Janine, in her victim impact statement said that the father of her 3 children was a warm-hearted presence and that his absence had left a palpable void in their family. She said that he had been violently ripped from their lives. The widow also revealed in the court that she suffered from a heart attack when she saw her husband's lifeless, unrecognizable body in the hospital. She said, "This is what makes it such a senseless crime. It's a mystery to us how these people even got involved in our lives." Phillips and his son, Cody and Kaylin, were confronted by a group including Thomas and Cox on a public highway outside Kelowna. Thomas had emerged from a pickup truck holding a baseball bat in one hand and a ball-peen hammer in the other. He kept yelling at Phillip how he dare mess with the Hells Angels. The 4 Hells Angels associates, Robert Cox, who is now Norman Cox's father, Daniel and Matthew McRae, and Anson Shell, allegedly kicked Phillips as he lay on the ground after Norman and Rob had assaulted him. Kelowna RCMP Superintendent commented on the sentencing, saying, "Although the matter remains before the courts, I hope that these guilty pleas will serve to bring some measure of closure to those who cared for Dane Phillips." Number 6. Zane Peora Wallace. Wallace is a Hells Angel prospect who took the life of a mother of 2 in a brutal assault. His victim, 30-year-old Jasmine Tamara Wilson, died in Wellington Hospital in August of 2019. She had been discovered unconscious and severely injured when someone dumped her outside the Wanganui Hospital Emergency Department a few days earlier. Wallace's father was the one who discovered Jasmine's body when Wallace had called him asking for help. His father Steve, mother Leanne, and his sister Stevie Lee Wallace were also convicted and sentenced for trying to hinder justice in Jasmine's case. Zane was brought before Justice Francis Cook in the High Court in Wanganui to receive his sentence. He had been charged with several criminal offenses. Jasmine's family and friends said they were all racked with guilt over her death since she had been subjected to violence for months by her then-partner Zane. One of her sisters said that Jasmine's death has left a hole in her heart that will last an eternity. Multiple family members of Jasmine spoke in court about the shock, pain, and suffering they are still feeling even years after her death.
If you're that much of a danger to your family, walk away. You have to realize you don't want to be that guy doing that sort of shit to somebody else's kid.
They all addressed Zane, who was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years to 6 months for taking Jasmine's life. Zane admitted to a plethora of other charges, including sending death threats to the victim's family and assaulting other people. The detective senior sergeant Neil Forlong told a news outlet that Jasmine's injuries were some of the worst he had ever seen. Wallace pleaded guilty before he was due to have a retrial since his first trial had ended in May 2021 when medical evidence was updated. Earlier, he had admitted to attacking Wilson many times, once in the Waganani Hells Angels clubhouse in May of 2019. Wilson and Wallace's families clashed in the courtroom gallery while he was taken into the courthouse cells. Jasmine's family members kept shouting at Wallace to burn in hell while the police officers tried to keep the two families apart. Wallace had a long history of violence. He had previously been convicted of assaulting other partners going back to 2014. He had repeatedly attacked Jasmine in the 9 months before her death. The fatal incident began in an argument between the two, after which he assaulted her, but she was alive then. However, the next day he attacked her again, only this time she couldn't survive. Number 7. Dean Daniel Kelsey. Dean Kelsey is a Hells Angel member who took the life of an innocent man in Dartmouth. Kelsey assaulted Sean Simmons, a 31-year-old father of 2 belonging to Lower Sackville, back in October of 2000. The incident happened in the lobby of a Trinity Avenue apartment building. Kelsey was charged along with 3 other people for the death. He was handed a life sentence for his crimes in March 2003. This was later downgraded to second degree on appeal. Kelsey was arrested back in 2001, and since then, he'd been in jail. 2 other men involved in the case, Neil Smith and Wayne James, were also given life sentences for their roles in Simon's death. The group took Simon's life on orders from a Hells Angel because he allegedly had an affair with the mistress of a gang member of the Halifax chapter in the early 90s. Though Kelsey was convicted of conspiracy to take someone's life and first degree, his sentence was increased in 2008 and again in 2015 for assaulting fellow inmates. The hit was ordered by Hells Angel member Neil Smith. Unfortunately, despite the vehement opposition of the victims and their families as well as the prosecution, Kelsey was granted parole back in 2019. Kelsey spent 18 years in jail before he was finally released, to the dismay of his victims. Simon's family was also concerned that Kelsey's release might be due to the parole board trying to fill a quota. Kelsey's prior convictions included assault, causing bodily harm, uttering threats, mischief, robbery, obstructions of a peace officer, theft, and narcotics trafficking. His misconduct in jail and attacks on fellow inmates proved that he felt no remorse for his actions whatsoever. Number 8. Brian Shane Henson. Brian Shane Henson is a member of the Hells Angel outlaw motorcycle gang and belongs to Merced. The 42-year-old Henson was a prospective member of the Merced chapter of the club, and according to court documents in early 2017, he negotiated a deal to sell a huge quantity of narcotics in exchange for 20 stolen firearms. Henson didn't know that they had actually made a deal with an undercover agent from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. After negotiating a deal for almost 1 week, Henson and his co-defendant, Hussein Eltareb, who was a full-patch member of the Hells Angel Club, took a 7-hour drive from Merced to Needles, California in order to meet up with the undercover agent. After they arrived, Needles, Henson handed the narcotics to the agent. He then took the firearms in his possession and placed them in the trunk of Eltareb's car. As soon as the exchange happened, law enforcement officers arrested Henson and Eltareb. At the time of his arrest, authorities had also recovered a loaded revolver that was hidden next to the driver's seat in the vehicle. In October 2017, Henson pled guilty to the distribution of narcotics and possession of firearms in furtherance of a trafficking crime. The case was investigated by the ATF's Flagstaff, Arizona field office. They received assistance from Coconino County Narcotics Task Force, the Mojave County General Narcotics Task Force, and the California Highway Patrol. After pleading guilty, Henson was given a mandatory minimum sentence of 180 months in federal custody. Later in December, after a bench trial, the judge found Eltareb, who was 27 at the time, guilty of conspiracy to distribute illegal substances and possession of a firearm in furtherance of narcotics trafficking. Eltareb was also sentenced to a minimum of 180 months in federal prison. Number 9. Stephen Sanders. Stephen Sanders is a former president of a local chapter of Hells Angels. Back in 2013, Stephen was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. He was convicted of several felony charges, including solicitation and kidnapping. Sanders, who was 41 at the time, admitted that he kidnapped 2 people for the benefit of a criminal street gang, according to prosecutors. While his case was pending, Sanders also conspired to have witnesses and law enforcement officers associated with the case assaulted. He actually wanted to take their lives. He was prosecuted in several other cases over the past years by District Attorney's Office. In 2012, he was convicted of solicitation to take someone's life, robbery, and assault with force, most likely to cause great bodily injury. In April and June of 2013, Sanders pleaded guilty to assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping charges, and gang allegations. Before he was sentenced, Sanders requested to withdraw his guilty plea, but the San Diego Superior Court judge denied this request. His attempt to have his witnesses in connection with a pending kidnapping and torture case harmed greatly reduced his chance of receiving a lenient sentence. At his sentencing, Sanders addressed the court and expressed his doubts regarding his situation. He said that he felt pressured to enter a guilty plea since he faced a lengthy sentence if he was convicted at trial. Despite admitting on record, Sanders refused to accept that the Hells Angels was a criminal street gang. His attorney also tried to withdraw his guilty plea, but the motion was denied. According to the district attorney, Sanders' sentencing was an important victory for law enforcement. Talking about Sanders' case, the DA said, "In recent years, the defendant has engaged in a series of violent crimes against the citizens of San Diego. During the course of being prosecuted in a kidnapping and mayhem case, he conspired to take the lives of those who were key parts of a case against him. Our office dismantled his plans to have witnesses and law enforcement officers assaulted, holding him accountable for his actions." Number 10. Christian Rufino. Christian A. Rufino is an admitted member of the Hells Angel Motorcycle Club belonging to Brewster. He was arrested by Cranston police as a felon carrying a firearm. Rufino, who was 42 back then, pleaded guilty to one count of being a felon in possession of a firearm in August 2011, stemming from a December 2009 traffic stop by a Cranston police officer who realized that Rufino was high. When he searched Rufino's vehicle, he discovered a loaded handgun, ammunition, and a small bag containing an illegal substance in his car. Rufino had previously been convicted of assault and battery by a dangerous weapon in 1995, armed robbery with intent to take someone's life in New Bedford in 1998, and a bank robbery by force, violence, and intimidation in Maine in 1990. His case was investigated by Cranston police and officers assigned the FBI's Safe Street Task Force, according to the Justice Department. During the sentencing hearing, U.S. District Court Judge John J. McConnell sentenced Rufino as an armed career criminal. Prosecutors said that he admitted to being a member of the New York chapter of the Hells Angels. Rufino was sentenced to 15 years in prison for violating a law barring felons from carrying firearms. Prosecutors also revealed that Rufino had initially been stopped for overspeeding on Route 95. Because of his blatant disregard for the rules, Rufino ended up in jail once again, and this time for a much longer time.